I feel like we're going to do too little too late at some point. But I feel like now, since stuff is where it's at, we're constantly seeing more laws being introduced, more restrictions. Every time they propose a positive list, it gets scarier and scarier of how restricted it is. And I feel like if we don't start speaking up, we do stand to lose just keeping them in general. Yeah. And I don't mean just monitors gone or big snakes. I mean, keeping reptiles in general at some point, if we don't step up and say, that's not what we stand for kind of thing.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and also welcome to 2023. I think the last episode I released was probably in the new year. Of course, I'm recording this right now in 2022, so I don't know exactly when, but I know for a fact it's 2023 by the time you're listening to this. So it is another year. Hopefully everyone's had a great New Year's and a good holiday break, and I'm very excited to bring another year of the podcast to everybody. This is now going to be, I think, the 5th year of the podcast when we hit the fall, so that's pretty amazing. That really is to everyone's support, everybody that supported me just by listening to the podcast, sharing the content, supporting the sponsor of the podcast, Custom Reptile Habitats, or being one of the patrons at patreon.com/animalsathome. All of that support has culminated into me being able to continue the podcast. So thank you guys so much for your support. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by James Graham of Top Shelf Geckos. James is a small batch reptile breeder out of Canada, mainly working with African Fat-Tails, collared lizards, and some new Caledonian species. And this episode is really sparked by this solo episode I released a few weeks ago. Many of you know that episode really did spark off a lot of conversation, and one of them was this podcast, because James sent me a message and he kind of took me to task on the term that I use, industrial care. People always hear me say that. When I talk about industrial style care, I'm talking about sort of the bare bones rack, the paper towel, the water dish, the small tub, and I constantly refer to that as industrial care. And he said, isn't that just a mill? Isn't that just a reptile breeding mill? And I had to think about that for a little bit. I had to wonder, maybe that is a mill. I actually don't know. How do we define a mill? For some reason, I kind of shy away from that term because it seems ultra negative, but maybe in some ways it's the right term to use. So in the center of this episode, we get into that. We discuss whether or not that's the appropriate term to use and whether or not we should be calling out those people. If we do, in fact, think that they're mills, maybe we should be a little more strict and a little more harsh with how we talk about them. And so we discussed that. We also discussed James's breeding operation, how he goes about enriching the lives of his breeding animals and simultaneously making a profit. There are so many myths that breeders bring to the table. Like, if we do this, if I enrich the animals of my breeders, then the cost of the animal or the offspring is going to be too expensive and the market's going to collapse. If we don't produce animals at this rate, the large companies are going to collapse because they need people to buying animals. There are so many different myths. We discuss those, and we discuss where there's some, faulty thinking in those. We discussed the major disparity between many lizard breeders and snake breeders. Even in the episode, I talk about how difficult it is for my mind to think of a very enriched environment when it comes to a snake breeding operation, but how easy it is for my mind to get there when I'm thinking about lizards, which is very weird, and you might be the same way. So we discussed that strange disparity. James also provides some incredible tips for how you, if you are a small batch breeder or you want to get into small batch breeding, how you can do that economically and how you can save money in order to apply enrichment to the animals you keep while simultaneously making a profit, like I had already said. So this podcast really is packed full of information for both just you as an audience member who's wanting to listen to this conversation, but also people who are wanting to get into the breeding world, and how if you want to do that ethically, then this is an episode that will help you get there. Thank you for listening to the episode. If you did enjoy it, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com to find the show notes for this episode or any other episode that we have produced. You can also share it on social media, Instagram or Facebook. That really does help bring more ears and eyes to the episode. If you would like to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. That really does help me pay for the expenses that are associated with producing this podcast. We are very close to hitting that $500 a month goal, which will allow me to completely cover the cost of editing the podcast. So that would be a huge relief for me to be able to know that the Patreon sponsorships is covering the cost of editing, so I'm never going to be in the red in a month. That really does help. Or you can head to customreptilehabitats.com. That is the sponsor of this podcast. If you click on the link in the YouTube description or the show notes, that is an affiliate link. If you do make a purchase, a small commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. Let's jump into the episode. Enjoy. All right. Well, James, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you. We kind of connected after I released the solo episode a few episodes back, and so we'll get into kind of how that part of the conversation where we were jamming back and forth, because I'm very eager to get into that. But as always, I like to just lay a little bit of a foundation. So because you are working with animals and you're breeding with animals as well, maybe you could just quickly let us know how you got into reptile keeping, or where you got that fascination, and then we'll get into how you started added the layer of breeding on top of it.
Okay, yeah. So I guess it's like everyone. I've listened to enough podcasts where it's pretty much the same response most of the time. It's either dinosaurs or just a fascination with catching stuff when you're a kid. And I was definitely a catcher. We went to like the States a lot for vacations when I was a kid, and we would be in Myrtle Beach, and all I wanted to do was either stay at the hotel and catch the lizards that were on the wall to like see all the different patterns and colors on them. Or I was like, hey, let's go back to the alligator farm. And my family was just like, why do you want to do these things? Yeah. Like I could have gone there every day, because it was just like, they called them alligator farms, but it's really just like a reptile zoo basically.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, kind of just started there. And then I kept like a water dog, which is like a larval tiger salamander. Mm-hmm. And I got him to turn into a tiger salamander, and that was kind of my first experience. I was a really young kid then, like 10 or something like that.
Was that something you could buy from a store, or you could?
Yeah, I don't know the ethics of it now that I'm like an adult reptile keeper. I don't know if that was, because I feel like it's almost like selling a tadpole with a frog, which is you should be selling the frog, right? So yeah, I don't know about that part, but it was definitely a cool experience, because I did get to see it change over time, and I changed its setup. And I for a young kid, I got to give myself a bit of credit. I did okay. I feel like I did good with that. And then from after that, I kind of just had an overall fascination with any animal. I just I have right now we've got 2 big dogs, we have cats, we got all the lizards. So I just any animal I could interact with. I'd go up to my aunt's farm. She had horses, and she taught me to ride horses, and it was just, literally any animal. And then I didn't have reptiles for, since that one when I was a kid, the amphibian. And then I had moved in with a roommate, and he had a leopard gecko. And I was just like, kind of did like people keep reptiles as pets. Like it kind of was out of my head sort of thing. And then, from there, it was just, the internet and learning.
Yeah. The snowball starts.
Yeah. And like, I'll admit it's, I don't think enough people admit it. Like when I got into the hobby, I did just go too hard. And that's something that, I know like, the Project Herpetoculture guys had Billy Sven. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sven, yeah. They had him on, and the whole slowly growing your collection thing. I think that's like super important. Like probably one of the most important things that people can do when you start.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually funny, because the episode that I'm going to release tomorrow in real time is in like the 22nd. So by the time people are listening to this, it'll already be out. But it is kind of centered around that concept of so many. I mean, it's kind of a meme at this point. People go from 0 to 100, but then talking about that process of having that collapse where you realize you have too many, and then having to kind of, it's almost like the meme of the image of the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? People burn themselves out really quickly, and then they kind of get back into it with a different mindset. So did you go through a phase, like did you have to get rid of a bunch of animals at one point, or did you find a point where you were just overwhelmed?
I don't think I got to a point where I ever felt like I was overwhelmed with the amount of animals I had. I just really like interacting with my animals, and I felt like I was at a point I probably wasn't interacting with all of them as much as I would like to.
Right.
So I've reduced a bit, but it wasn't more. It wasn't like everyone always had their care. It's really important for me to be able to spend time with them, because what's the point of keeping them if we're not, it doesn't have to be full on interaction, but I just want to watch them. And when you have so many, you kind of run out of that, right? You run out of time.
Yeah, exactly. And so when did breeding enter your herpetoculture? Did you just decide to get into as a hobbyist breeder, or how did that pop into your head?
Yeah, again, I've made some notes just so I remembered things over here, and where you put how did I start breeding? I literally just wrote stupidity and naivety under it because if I'm being honest, I think that's where a lot of people kind of start with breeding. Is it's just the mindset of I like reptiles, I want to breed a reptile, but there's so many other branches that come off of that need to be taken into consideration, and I definitely wasn't at the time. Obviously, I still do it, so things have changed over time. But yeah, I think at first I just got into it because I had some nice bearded dragons. They were high quality bearded dragons, but even then, I guess that would be like 11 years ago now. They probably weren't needed in the market then, just like now, kind of thing. So yes, I've definitely over time kind of gone towards more what I feel are like good pet reptiles.
Yeah, I think there is that want to breed, right? Engage in that it's a more advanced level of keeping, breeding, and caring for babies, and everybody wants to do that. Once you hit a point where you feel competent just caring for them, you want to take that next step, and it is hard to actually put the brakes on before you do that because everybody's so excited, right? And like you said, naivety is a perfect way to describe it because you just jump in and you don't necessarily think about the greater consequences of it. You just want to do it and try it. And I mean, and hopefully in most cases, the animals end up in good homes and whatnot. But as you said, sometimes there isn't a need for extra bearded dragons in the market. So as far as your evolution as a reptile breeder goes, you're kind of doing that on a hobbyist sense. What was the transition to thinking, okay, this could be a job? Was that something that you always thought, or did you kind of stumble along the way thinking, okay, maybe I can turn this into more of a full-time income?
I think that point kind of came. So obviously I started with the beardies, like I said, but then I kind of fell into geckos, just due to size. They're smaller, and it was just it's easier to keep them because you don't need to give them as much space as a beardie. And then I found the fat tails, and I think I just did really well with my fat tails. There wasn't really anyone else. Was one other breeder in Canada of African fat-tails at the time that I started breeding them, at least on like a larger scale. They were someone I think some people didn't want to buy from, so I kind of I fell into a place, I guess, with the fat tails that kind of put me in a position to grow my other parts of my collection over time.
That is a weirdly underrated species, right? I mean, as far as the amount of people keeping them and breeding them, there's just the leopard gecko has taken off, but for whatever reason, African fat-tail, similar looking gecko, different care, but they just don't. There's no hold in the market for them.
I don't want to make anyone angry because there's so many people that love leopard geckos. African fat-tails are so much better geckos. They're calmer, they're cuter, they're not as genetically manipulated now. So I just, I love fat tails, and I've been slowly kind of moving away from like morph type breeding. But I'll always keep fat tails and breed fat tails because I genuinely believe they're a really good pet reptile.
I remember Bree was telling me this when I was in Toronto for the CRBE. She was Bree from Jungle Vault. She was talking to me about African fat-tail morphs, and I'm kind of forgetting. Sorry, Bree, if you're listening to this. I forget exactly what she said, but it was something to do with the morphs. Like there's something peculiar about them. Maybe there's not as many, or they don't transfer. I forget it. Can you talk a little bit about the African fat-tail morphs, or is that ringing a bell as far as something that's strange compared to leopard geckos?
Well, I mean, with leopard geckos, the morphs now, I don't know how many there is.
There's
like,
tons,
I would say hundreds kind of thing. If you include people's like own little personal line bred stuff that they're doing. Fat tails, there's like under 10 genes.
Right.
And most are recessive genes. So it takes you a little bit, not a little bit more to do it, but you're kind of, you slowly had to kind of build on what there was. And I think that might have also made them a bit more like genetically stable.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. She was saying there was some, I forget if it was instability in some morphs that just basically lines just die off and there's clear stops before carrying them on.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Brie. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think I remember her talking about a line of like Oreo or whiteout Oreos that were having problems, like spinning or something like that. And I stand to be corrected, but I think I remember people talking about that. I've never had any issues. There's two morphs where females are infertile.
That's what it was. Okay.
So yes. that one, I'm really big about being open about that because I would still have a lot more money if I didn't spend a lot of money on females that couldn't do anything. So the person I was buying fat tails from didn't say to me, hey, these females aren't going to breed or ever produce an egg. And
so you bought them in the pretense that you liked the morph and that you would be able to breed them. Wow.
Yeah.
And they knew that they'd be infertile.
Yeah, because they were like the big breeders of it, right? So so my wife actually, as like one of the first big gifts she got me when we were kind of dating, was just some ghost animals, which is one of the genes that has the infertile females. And I thought, at the time I was like, this is the greatest gift ever. And it's still amazing that, she was willing to do that for me and buy me those. But it sucks that she had to put that money in and I had to put the time in just because someone couldn't be transparent. So I'm always like, this is a ghost. It's a pet. They're beautiful pets, but they're a pet.
Yeah. Well, that's a really very unique aspect to African fat tails because it does kind of temper back the morph breeding craze, right? Because then you are selling them as pets. You're not selling them as a guy who discovered them 3 weeks ago and is now going to set up a rack because he wants to get rich off them. You're just appreciating the color mutation, the pattern mutation, whatever it is, and you're going to keep that as an animal. And there's absolutely zero way that animal can reproduce. That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
It definitely slows things down too, because you can't just take the visual to the visual or the multi-visual to the multi-visual. And you don't end up in that spot where you've got easily getting like 10 genes into an animal. Mm-hmm. You can't even do that in a fat tail because those don't exist.
Right.
So
as you work with the species and you said you're slowly starting to reduce the amount of morph breeding that you're doing with them, are you still just sort of producing them as normals, or you're producing morphs as well, or what's your plan with that project?
My current plan is probably just to reduce it as much as I can. It is one of my main things here, but I do keep them in racks. That's my one species that I keep in racks, which listeners can't see, but for YouTube, I've got massive cages behind me, and I like doing that now. I've noticed how important that is to animals. Mm-hmm. And fat tails are kind of the one animal that like I've done that kind of thing with them, and they do good in it, but they definitely thrive in a rack. So I try to provide them with a rack that's more than a rack. Mm-hmm. I don't like that bare rack anymore. I've got cork in with them. I've got rock in with them. There's multiple hides on both sides of the enclosure. I don't want it to feel like a rack just because they do good in that situation. Mm-hmm. Which again could just be like the way we supplement them or the way they take in the supplements. They just kind of like geckos with the complete diet, like how much UVB should we be giving them? I don't know if it's that sort of scenario where maybe if I change my supplementation. So there's a lot of facets to why I do it the way I still do.
Yeah. There's always nuance in those things. And I think we'll probably fold that into the conversation a little bit later as well, because that's an interesting part. So then as you're working with these fat tails, you started to mix in, I'm sure, other species as well, because you said if you're starting to reduce the African fat tail, there's probably other things you're working with. So how did that come about? You just decide you wanted to work with more than one, and what species are you working with?
So I think it kind of came about just my mindset's very much that if we are producing animals, we need to make sure they get good homes. That's always my number one priority. I always tell people, like, when you come up to us at an expo and the way you speak about the animal or the way you show your emotion toward the animal kind of thing, we can tell if that animal's going to a good home. That's the one reason I do like expos. I don't like the stress of doing that to the animals, but it lets me interact with the customer to know my animal's going to a good home. It's a lot different than an email correspondence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you even if you have someone come up to your table who clearly doesn't know a lot about the species, you can just read by the eagerness in their voice and how interested they are in the questions they're asking. You'd be more comfortable selling it to somebody who has less information in person than someone through email who claims to know everything, and you don't get that interaction with them. You have no idea if they're ever going to evolve their care or what they're going to do with that animal.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. So then, yeah. So as far as adding extra species,
Yeah. So I just kind of decided, since there's only so many homes in North America that I can send fat tails off to every year, kind of thing. I already had experience with like a lot of reptiles. I've kept a lot of reptiles and helped people with their collections before, and it kind of I had experience with other things, and I feel like I had kind of a knack for like what's a good pet reptile, because there's definitely like good pets, and then there's other keepers who are keeping it as a pet, but it's a different connection, right? And I really like good pet reptiles, so I started moving into like other species of geckos, like gargoyle geckos. Chihuahua geckos are another one that I'm keeping fairly good amount of. I think those are a really good gecko. I think a lot of the other new Caledonian geckos, besides the crested gecko, are like really good gecko pets. And then lately I've gotten...
do you have what's wrong with the crested? People are going to be wondering, what's wrong with crested geckos?
So besides overproduction, to me, there isn't as much going on up there. I don't know if that's because of overproduction, but my Chihuahua, when I go into their enclosures, they're just tracking me. Some of them follow you and stalk you, but they're very alert to everything that's going on. The Leachianas we have, I really like those. Just obviously the size is impressive, but when you see them move around for how big they are, it's crazy. Yeah. So I just kind of wanted, or sorry, the cresty thing. Yeah, they're overproduced, but also, there's just not as much going on. So they're kind of they're not as interesting. And also I feel like you just, as a reptile person, you go to an expo, you pretty much see ball pythons and crested geckos. I've seen enough crested geckos for a lifetime.
I think
I'm good.
I think we're all there with that. So as far as the way, you'd mentioned keeping the African fat tails in a rack, and I think there's a spectrum of breeding animals in bare bones all the way up to probably, fairly enriched enclosures. How has your method of breeding changed, regardless of the species? I'm sure it's changed, but depending on the species, there's probably differences. But are there things that you're doing now that are different from a decade ago as far as what you're providing the breeders?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Like the size of the bin I give them, what I put in the enclosure. I would say when I started with fat tails, what you see with a lot of breeder setups is they have a humid hide on the hot side and a water bowl on the other side, which is pretty similar to like a ball python type thing, but at least they have a hide on one side. But that was kind of the typical what you would see from breeders. And I just kind of, as a younger fellow, you just sort of, okay, that's what people are successfully doing. I'll do that too, kind of thing. And then I noticed over time, as I started to just provide more, it wasn't that their behavior was changing in a negative way. It was a positive way, if anything. So I just started doing, I upped my bin sizes to, they would be like considered, I think, sub-adult or adult bins for ball pythons kind of thing for 40-gram gecko. I put leaf litter, cork, stone, anything basically that's going to provide a different texture or something for a cricket to hide under, and they've got to go after it. Like anything enriching, I started offering. If there was things that I wanted to start giving UVB to, like our blue tongues, for example, I still keep them in racks, but the racks are very similar to TCs. Like with the UVB and the heat over top still. And I used Christmas tree bins. I don't know if you know what a Christmas tree bin
Yeah, they're
is,
like
but
5 or 6 foot long
I
bins.
was gonna say I can lay in it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so they have tons of room. They have rocks. They have cork, multiple high, everything. And I just started doing more and more like that. And I never saw any negative to doing it.
Hmm.
There was never a drawback to get offering them more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is where like the word rack really gets cloudy, right? We kind of use it as a term, and a lot of times when I use it, I'm talking about bare bones situation, and obviously there is a huge spectrum between. You can offer essentially just a slightly cheaper version of a regular enclosure if you're in a breeding setup. And then as far as the African fat tails, like we were talking before we started recording with the Dr. Baines episode that I recorded and learning lots about light. Have you tried introducing light to them, or is there a reason that you don't provide light? Do you think that they need it, or where are you sitting on that?
So I do. Sorry, I do provide them with light.
Okay.
It's not in their rack in the summertime. Everybody will go outside at some point.
Oh,
Everybody.
Okay.
All living creatures need light.
Mhm.
Like that shouldn't be a questioned thing. But keeping in mind, an hour outside is equivalent, I think, to like 24 hours in the enclosure with the lights on.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
So getting them outside throughout the summer is what I try to do with everybody. Just rotating. We have screen enclosures. We have Laguna bins that will put some of the bigger animals in, like the Uromastics will go into like Laguna bins, and those will go outside in the summer. And yeah, light animals need light. We need light. They need light. Everything needs light if it is alive.
So yeah, I completely agree. So what you do is you just you'll take them out and put them in the screen enclosure on a sunny day and let them hang out in the sun, and then bring them back in the evening type thing.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's such an easy way to do it too for people that don't want to spend the crazy amounts on light, especially if you have good summers, then you can be done easily.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. We've got nice. Eventually next year, I'd like to actually build outdoor. We're in the Canadian Shield, so it's like rocky in some spots.
Yeah. We have
And
that too.
I'd really like to build around some of the rock formations I have, so that I can get the Uromastics into basically like a real rock enclosure, because the rock gets hot in
That
the
would
summer.
be cool. Yeah. That granite gets really hot in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's so true though. It's funny, the Canadian Shield, it's just like, it looks really cool, but as far as building is concerned, it's kind of a nightmare to work around.
I had to dig my wife out a garden.
Oh.
It was at one point I had boulders ratchet strapped to a tree, just cranking them out. So
Oh yeah. And yeah, you think of boulder small and you start digging it out, you're like, oh God, that's the size of a car.
yeah, there's a few of those.
Yeah. Okay, that's really cool. So I think that lays a pretty good foundation of kind of what you're up to and sort of your mindset around keeping and breeding. And that brings us to, after I released that episode, that solo episode I did a couple of weeks ago, just talking about the ethics of care. One of the terms that you kind of took me to task on was that I always use the term industrial breeding, and what I mean by that is I'm always talking about sort of the bare bones rack, and then you had brought up the point, like, why don't you just use the term mill, like breeding mill? And I had to think about that for a while, because I thought, I don't know why I don't use the term mill, because it definitely brings a negative connotation. So partly it could be just me not wanting to throw spears at people, and then the other part of me was thinking, maybe when I think of mill, I think of something that's really negative, like dirty and like puppy mill situation. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I don't. Maybe it is a mill. Maybe these should be considered mills. So maybe let's just discuss that as a. Maybe you can lay out what your thoughts are with that term, and then we can kind of decide whether or not this is the appropriate term to use.
Yeah, you got me thinking when you showed. I won't name a name, but we brought up a certain ball python thing, and I looked it up, and I had never really seen. But I kind of stay out of the snake community. I've kept snakes before, but so I just wanted to go see, and I think you were saying that your concept of a mill was filth and crowding, and I think to me it's kind of just crowding to an extent, because you can have cleanliness and you can stay on top of something and it can still be crowded, which isn't fair to the animal. So I think it's kind of like a fine line of when something that you're referring to as industrial would fall into a mill would be like they could quickly slip into that, right? Just because it's a clean large, like, a setup that it's very spotless. All it takes is a little bit of somebody gets sick, somebody can't go do that stuff for a little bit, and that many animals in one small area quickly becomes a mill because it's filthy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of this. It's a weird fine line that, like, even I don't know what would be considered, because sometimes when you see, we all see it in the news sometimes where they're like puppy mill or bird mill. You don't see the reptile part as much. It was funny. I Googled it to look it up to see, like, and I literally put in every animal before the word mill just to see what was there. And the reptile one was just a really old article that I'd already seen. And it was like a PETA article. And it's just, it didn't have much to hold on to opposed to all of the other animals where you saw it. And I was like, oof, that's rough to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I do see that term pop up quite often. People will say, like, it is a mill or they are mills. And I guess, first off, we'll say that if it's a mill, it's a negative thing. That's we're trying to strive away from mill, the mill structure. And if you're breeding animals, it's not a mill. I shouldn't say just because you're breeding animals, it doesn't mean it is a mill. So there is, there is this kind of fine line that you have to walk through, because we don't want everybody to think who's breeding that you have a mill in your room. But there's certainly, we can extend down into the negative sides of breeding, and it is a mill. And I think one of the points that you had mentioned is when the health of the animal or the lifestyle of the animal, it becomes second to the profit, that sort of starts walking into mill territory. I think that's what you had said.
Yeah. When productivity and profit is going over what you can provide the animal, I could make more, but I like, for example, I just spent like $600 on cork because I felt like my enclosures didn't have enough cork in them. I was looking at them being like, oh, they could climb here if I gave them this, get closer to the UVB, and I was just like, oh, I guess I gotta buy cork. And it's like, I could.
There's a $600 thought.
Yeah, and if I didn't do that, it's like that would be money that, I don't know, me and my wife could go do something. But we've made, I want to say she's made a lot of sacrifices so that I can do what I want to do and have a passion for.
Yes. Yeah, and there is that, if you are breeding animals, you do have to consider that ethical side. Like, that's a really important part of keeping and breeding animals. There is that side. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the dog breeding analogy that you gave, because I think that's another way we can start separating, just a holistic breeder from somebody that we could classify as a mill.
Yeah. So I to me, that dog breeder thing, I brought that up because when I've bought dogs from breeders, like 4 dogs now, and all of the dogs that were the breeders, my dog's parents, were treated like the family pet. They were the family pet. They were worried about her while she was pregnant. They were worried about her after she gave birth. They cared about the puppies, but you could tell that was their dog still, and they were always concerned about that animal. And I don't know if we have that as much in reptiles, where they're kind of like the priority. Yeah, it was just that the dogs to me were always like a family member and part, or at least a pet, right?
Yes.
Like, and it's kind of this weird thing in reptiles where it almost feels like we aren't breeding pets. We call them pets, but we're not breeding them in like a pet way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such an important point. And that's one thing that really struck me when you said that. I was like, oh yeah, I totally know what you mean, where the value of the animal, if the female dog lost her litter, but the female lived, that would be a celebration in a way, because we didn't lose her. Thank God we didn't lose her. That was a horrible experience. Where in the reptile world, a lot of times it's, it would be the shame would be over the loss of the clutch or the loss of the litter, because the money associated with that. I mean, of course, there's sadness in the death of the neonates and whatnot, but there's that dollar figure that gets immediately stamped on that breeder, and if she fails, it's not good for the pocketbook, which completely falls into that millish territory.
Yeah, for sure. That's the that's kind of another one of those lines, right? Where it's there's a bunch of them that they're really easy to cross into, where all of a sudden it's a mill.
Yeah. And so there is so many myths that comes with breeding reptiles that you especially hear from the breeding side, right? People who breed, they bring up all different reasons why they can't have more enriching, enclosures, or they can't have more space and whatnot. So are there, classics are like, if we do this, then the animals are going to be so expensive, nobody can buy them. That's a really common one we hear. I can't even think, there's so many different sort of, I guess we can call them excuses for not enriching the lives of the actual breeding animals that we hear. Are there any that stick out in your head that you just like shake your head at?
That one, that's a big one. Another one would be that we need the big guys so that reptile companies want to make reptile products. Mm-hmm. Personally, a lot of what you see here, obviously there's like Arcadia behind me, but that's supplementation as far as caging, lighting, all of that kind of stuff. If it's not UVB, I'm probably making it on my own so that it's actually a correct enclosure for that animal. A lot of the stuff that we're being told that, oh, we need these companies. Well, then the companies need to start making bigger enclosures and better bulbs, and everything just needs to be done better than if we, there's so many small niche PVC companies that are making great. You got some behind you, like there's people doing it, and they're not doing it on a large scale like the other big reptile companies. This is a small company who's just trying to be like, hey, we're making enclosures correctly. And that's what we need. That's exactly like a small breeder being like, hey, I'm keeping the animal and I'm doing it correctly. Is it more expensive? Probably, but you're doing it right, and you're probably only going to do it that once.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's a classic line is we need to do this so we can, funnel money to the big reptile companies. It's like, well, why are all the reptile companies making shitty products?
Why is there heat rocks still? Like, why?
What's happening
these
there?
These things wouldn't exist if that was a fact, right? They would all be doing things like Arcadia. I wouldn't need to just be referring to be like, okay, if you're going to get one of my collared lizards, like I would highly suggest using Arcadia's vitamin regimen and using their lighting only, because that's what I'm using, because everything else isn't enough to me. And that Arcadia, I realize it's a big company, but it's not the other companies. The other companies are way bigger. They're way bigger. So it's like all of the good companies that in the reptile industry are the small guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so true.
Then when we go to the animals, it's almost like a flip where people don't look at the small guy as much as the big guy.
So as far as being profitable while maintaining a mindset of the animal comes first, that the breeding animal comes first, their welfare comes first, how are you able to do this in a way where you can make money at the end? Because I think sometimes people think that I don't like people making money off reptiles. I have absolutely no problem with that. I technically make money off reptiles doing the podcast, right? I have no issues with that. I don't have any problem with people, getting paid for their time. But at the same time, so how do you accomplish that?
Kind of a few factors. So I guess I'll start with food. My wife she's gone to school for horticulture. So she is pretty much feeding all of my insects and all of my herbivores and my omnivores. So food in that aspect kind of gets scratched off. So we're just left with feeder insects.
So are you growing? You're growing vegetation at home? Is that what?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah. So another. Sorry, I should have started with my other point. We used to live in the city. We had other jobs. We got. We had decent jobs, and we ended up buying a house out there, and then we didn't really want to do that anymore, like being out in the city. And it was basically just like, look, it's more realistic if I'm going to do this, if we can be out in the middle of nowhere kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So we moved to the middle of nowhere. We got land. We're so remote. We've got like satellite internet kind of thing. Like I'm on Elon Net right now.
Yeah.
So, so we made changes to our life. We both had never planned to have children. So that was a big, I hate saying it because I don't want people, people shouldn't feel like, oh, I'm having a kid, I got to get rid of my reptiles. But it's one of the most common things I hear when people are selling collections. It's like, oh, I'm having a kid, I can't have this many reptiles anymore.
Yeah.
And I never, she's never wanted children. And to me, it was always the whatever. And I never want to not have a lot of reptiles because I just love interacting with all the different species. So it was just sort of, yeah, that worked out. And that's a big expense in a lot of people's lives. So we definitely just changed our lives to make this a more suiting endeavor for me.
Yeah,
and then I do supplement it as well with, like I said earlier, some web design stuff. So
yeah. It's true. I mean, I talk about that on the podcast quite a lot, especially with my last year of having a baby. How much of a lifestyle change that is, and how expensive it is, and when you do have a baby, how little you'll care about your animals, your reptiles, and especially in that first half of the year, because you're just like so overwhelmed with this baby, and the priorities really shift. So that's a really good point, and that's what always worries me about people who have massive collections and then are going to have a baby. They don't. It's like, are you going to be okay? And that's you see that a lot, right? Like you said, people just dump collections because it's just too much.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most common ones I see. That or the market is dead on my species. And then
yeah. So that goes back to the mill, mill mindset.
Exactly.
So then, okay, so you're out in the country, you have some space, you're able to grow your own vegetation. I guess you're doing that inside in the winter, or?
Yeah, so we've got, she's got a big grow tent upstairs. She does some of it up there. I have a shelf underneath some of my geckos that are on like a, one of those metal bakers things. I've got one shelf that's just dedicated to seedlings, and I grow the seedlings, take them to her. She replants them. We just have got a system. And then we always go to our local grocery store and check for the mixed greens to be 50% off. And we make use of the 50% off for fruit. We got some 50% off dragon fruit the other day. So the monkey tails will love that.
Well, and that's huge, especially right now, because I mean, in Canada, I'm sure it's the same in the States. Everything is so insanely expensive. Groceries has just gone through the roof. You can't even get out of the grocery store for under $300. It seems like. So that's a huge savings, and it also makes your prices probably more stable because your food supply doesn't really change price-wise. I mean, the only thing that might fluctuate is the cost of electricity to grow the plant, but the seeds are not. The price of seeds is almost nothing. Even if it doubles, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and she's to the point where she, when stuff flowers, she takes the seeds from them. And then, so she's that kind of person. Yeah. So she's always on top. This year, we just, we're killing off like a big portion of our front grass right now. We've got it tarped off, and she's going to turn that into a full flower garden for like edible flowers for the Uromastics, and the blue tongues and the monkey tails can all eat that. So
will you be able to pick that and then dry them to save them for the winter, or once the summer's? Oh, you will. Okay. Yeah,
we do. We do that. We have like one of those net cylinder hanging things for drying out, and we fill it in the summer and then use it in the winter.
Okay, so that's a big tip right there. It's just having that reduction in food costs, and then but you are obviously having to buy feeders, or do you breed the feeders?
Crickets are my big expense, because most of my enclosures I build myself, so it's a one-time. I build them really well just once, but crickets are the constant thing, and they're definitely more of a constant now. The Fat Tails used to be pretty good about mealworms/crickets, but we're working with collared lizards now. And they pretty much just eat all day. That's all they want to do.
Yeah. So they just want to munch on all the crickets.
Constantly, yeah.
And then is there anything else that you do that comes to the top of your head as far as, making this economical while providing proper enrichment?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, to me, it's not, it's a weird question because I don't feel like giving them enrichment is taking from me. The rocks that are in their enclosures were dug out of the ground. Most people know somebody that they can be like, hey, you got property? Can I come grab some rocks from you? Some of the wood is just wood from around our property. And we just bake it and put it in. It's my time, and I want to spend my time with them. So to me, it's always crazy when people are like, oh, you can't offer enrichment without. Okay, but if you buy, let's say you buy a PVC hide for a snake, right? That hide should last for so long. So why? It's a one-time thing. Yes, if you're going to have that snake for, let's say, even just a decade, and it's going to breed a few of those years, not even like 1/10 of one of those babies is going to pay for that hide, which is then there for that animal's life.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I always look at it, is like So for the fat tails, I give them all the cork and all that. Each piece of cork is maybe a couple dollars, but like that's their piece of cork, right? They have that piece of cork. How, like, it's not going to wear away a piece of cork in like 5 years or whatever.
Exactly.
A lot of it is one-time cost. So we shouldn't be being like, oh, this one-time cost. Like Frank Payne was on, I don't know if he was talking to you or the Project Herpetoculture guys, but he said, if I would count the money I spent before I started making profit off this, I would never be making profit, because I've been I hate the word collecting, but I've been keeping reptiles now for 12 years. So you accumulate a lot stuff over that. Yeah. I have animals that are 10 years old. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still here, but I've gotten more. So it's like, the number goes up. Like, I would also say that'd be another aspect of it, right? Is my slow accumulation of collection, in quotes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't just like I got animals done. It was time.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, hearing you kind of contemplate that question, because it's like almost in your mind, there's no trade-off really, trying to trade off, okay, I'm going to have to add this and now I'm going to eat some profits. Like, it's just part of breeding animals, and part of being an ethical breeder is giving the breeders, the actual specific male and female breeders, a proper life, and keeping them as if you were basically keeping them if they were your only pet.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It's so, like I just said, it's so simple to offer these things. So to act like you're going to go broke by, I know there's people have thousands of animals sometimes, but
yes, yeah.
Then do it slowly over time. Like, we can all, you can always just stand to do better when it comes to our keeping. Like you said in the podcast that made me reach out to you, it was just like, when you have people who don't know what we're doing, they're not going to take the time to, like, if you sit there with a bunch of ball python guys and be like, oh, why do you do this? And it's just, they look at it, it's eye shot. It's just what they see, and the opinion is made. So I would rather people were looking at it like an enclosure like I have in this room, where there's cork everywhere, there's different types of wood, there's stone, there's literal rock crevices that I've built out of stacking rock, like things like that. I want that to be people's opinion of reptile keeping and breeding, not just keeping, but breeding. We need to be showing that everyone is treating these animals with some dignity. I realize that's a real minimum thing to say, but
yeah. No, it's so true. And I think, getting back to that mill term, that term gets used by people who aren't in the hobby all the time, especially when they see our breeding operations. Like, they would call that a reptile mill. Like, that's what it looks like to them. That's kind of what it is. Do you think that we should be calling people out more with that term? Like, that's, I guess, maybe part of my original hesitation with using that term, is it does have that negative connotation where it sort of feels like you're throwing fireballs at people. And I don't know how helpful that would be, but at the same time, we probably should be speaking truthfully about how things are.
Yeah, we should be. Honestly, I hesitate a lot on it, where I don't want my head on the pike, because I'm the one who's being like, well, you guys got to do better, right? Like that. No one wants to be that person, but we do. We really need to be like, speak up and be like, look, like, again, you said in the podcast, we're all a part of society. We go by society's rules so that we can partake in the society. So we need to make sure that they view what we're doing as something that is humane, right?
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. And one of the biggest differences, I think, which is bizarre, is the difference between snake breeders and lizard breeders. And for whatever reason, even in my own head, I feel like, it's easier to offer enrichment and proper enclosures for lizards than snakes. I don't know why that is. I think maybe that's just a
because you've been shown it. You've been shown it so much. You've just been shown it so much. We all get shown pretty much. Like, I hate saying it, but a lot of people, when they find the hobby, they find it through someone like Brian Barczyk, right? And that's what you're exposed to. I realize people are like, oh, he's changing his ways and stuff like that. But those old YouTube videos that have whatever, hundreds of thousands, millions views, whatever it is, are still there for people to absorb. And they're absorbing a lot of it. And then it does get in your head. It's like snakes don't, they don't manipulate their environment, or they don't do all this stuff, but they're they're just as intelligent. Not having arms does it makes them almost like this dead. Like that was
Yes.
yeah, that was you, right? That posted
Yeah.
and it's like just it makes no sense to try to treat them. They're a reptile. They just evolved differently, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was like one of the things I had shared today was just talking about the fact that they have no arms or legs. It makes it difficult for them to manipulate their environment, which from an optic point of view might make us think that they're just dumb and they can't do anything. But really, in reality, there's lots going on. But yeah, it's kind of funny the way that is, where you think about a snake breeding operation, and it's even in my head now. It's hard for me to picture snakes breeding in large enclosures.
I can't do it.
It's weird. It's so imagine being a breeder, someone who has a bunch of snakes, and then having that same exact structure in their brain, how difficult it would be, because all those decisions require money and time and energy and everything. So even from an outsider looking into a snake breeding operation, I find it hard to make that leap, even though we know that's the leap that we need to do to move ourselves away from mill to, ethical breeding operation.
Yeah, like even just seeing again, it doesn't, like we were talking about earlier, a rack doesn't need to be a rack. The basic idea. Her name Kayla. You did an episode with, I think her name's Kayla. Yeah. Why can't we keep breeder ball pythons in those? Why can't you offer them that? And then people are like, oh, they need the small space. It's like, that's great. That's what a hide is. The hide is the small space to go be safe in, right?
Yes,
that's why we give them multiple of those, so that they have more. It's just, it's weird. And it's like it goes back to the society thing. We're all part of it. And it's like, you almost want to be like, oh, well, they're not part of us. Because as a breeder who keeps large enclosures with things in them for the animal to interact with, I almost want to be like, oh, that's different. They're ball python farming, or they're, it's not part of the reptile hobby. But we can't do that. It's a reptile. It's all grouped in. When they see, doesn't matter if you have your leopard gecko in a 4x2x2, because there's way more ball pythons that are in half bins, I'll call them, which is when, you take the snake from one side to pull its eggs and it can just fit on the other side of the enclosure.
Yeah, the bin is two times larger than the entire body coiled up.
Yeah, the bin is what the hide should be in the actual bin.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So when you go to an expo, for example, and you have your animals on your table and you have them at a certain price point, would it really frustrate you to be next to somebody who's able to, have a price point that's 20% lower because they are trying to keep everything as clean and tidy and no extra, even though you've already kind of justified why, when you do set things up, it's a one-time purchase. It's not something that is happening every time, but there's that sense of competition as well amongst breeders, right? To make the prices fair, or where do you sit on that? Are you okay with charging more to compensate for some things?
Yeah. I think maybe when I was younger, I probably would have said no. But I think now that I'm older and I've done so many expos, and especially over the past year or two, the people who are coming out are more engaged than the people 10 years ago. They very much want to learn about the animals. I mean, obviously you still get those people that are just like, can I feed the crested gecko salad? But there's overall, the questions are better, and what they want from the animal and to give the animal is just better. And they're willing to pay more for that animal to have you. Even at the last expo, there was somebody selling full grown adult collared lizards, and I think they were $50 cheaper than mine. Mm-hmm. And I sold out that show of my baby collards because people they were like, yeah, I saw them. Yours look really healthy. There was people would just walk by. When we bring the collards, I don't like to just put them in delis. They go in one of these enclosures that I have behind me. It's like a 2x2. It's got full UVB and lighting because I want them to
look good.
They're desert. Yeah, I want them to look good and I want them to stay warm. The fat tails can kind of deal with more of that room temperature for a day kind of thing. The collards, you can just tell they just go dark. They're miserable. So I was like, no, we need to do more of this at expos where we show look, we care for the animals. They're not just sitting in a deli cup being able to turn around. We started using big can't see the box because of lights, but they're just massive salad containers instead of the little round delis because I wanted my geckos to just be able to move, not just rotate. I wanted them to be able to move back and forth. So
Yeah.
I lose space on the table and it costs more money. But again, people I feel like are more willing to pay for that now, which I wouldn't have said that in the past about the reptile hobby.
Yeah, it seems like people are moving in the right direction. So are you optimistic about herpetoculture in general? Do you think that as a group things are headed in the right direction and the people that need to be criticized are being criticized effectively?
I don't think I'm very optimistic, and I think that's probably why I reached out to you. I feel like we're going to do too little too late at some point.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of my reason. I've always been a very, I keep to myself a lot. Like I've been doing this a long time, but I have good customers who have, always bought geckos or whatever from me. But I feel like now since stuff is where it's at, we're constantly seeing more laws being introduced, more restrictions. Every time they propose a positive list, it gets scarier and scarier of how restricted it is. And I feel like if we don't start speaking up, we do stand to lose just keeping them in general.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just, monitors gone or big snakes. I mean, keeping reptiles in general at some point, if we don't step up and say, that's not what we stand for kind of thing. We don't know. A lot of, you hear a lot, again, we were talking about it earlier, where people are like, oh, the big guy, we need the big guy. You don't hear people in any other pet industry being like, oh, we need that big breeder breeding hundreds of dogs or hundreds of cats. It's all about like the conversation you had with TC, small batch.
Yes.
That's what other pet breeding is all about. And we need to get reptile breeding to that point. People do need to be willing to pay more for that, though. And I'm not saying that in a greedy way. I'm saying it in the extent of look at it like you're supporting a small business instead of going to Walmart or Amazon.
Yeah. And I think as a whole, it seems like our economy is slowly shifting towards, because nobody's like super happy about Walmart, we all shop at Walmart, but we'd rather
nobody wants to.
Nobody wants to. Yeah, we'd all rather it be somebody that know that owns the clothing store that you're going to buy, whatever it is. But that's just the way our economy has evolved at this point. But it's so true. We do kind of tend to focus on the big guys as being the end all and be all of the hobby, and really it is the niche microbreeders who are the lifeblood of the hobby, who are able to sit down and talk with people who are buying animals for the first time and being there when they need help, right? If you have a customer that needs help, but you've sold them a lizard, you're going to be a text or a phone call or a message away if they have questions, and that's not going to be the same. And it's
a lifetime warranty. I'm there for that animal's whole life. That's the big thing. Like anyone could message me. Even I took a break a few years ago and somebody reached out to me asking me like, oh, my fat tail I got from you stopped eating. And I still just took the time. Like I walked them through it. I taught them how to do my cricket assist feeding trick. And they were like, I got her going again. I was like, awesome. I'm going to go back to my reclusive shutting.
Yeah. And you could not do that if you produce 10,000 animals a year, obviously. I mean, it's just not possible. So that's where those niche and even in like something like factory farming, which is a pretty egregious practice that our society does, I'm seeing a lot more, especially where I am, a lot more sort of like ranch style homegrown meat that's producing for the grocery stores. Even in the regular grocery stores that are still chain grocery stores, you see meat that's pasture raised, all the stuff that you want to see when you're consuming that sort of thing. So I think we are headed there, but like you said, it may not happen fast enough. And when I lived in Winnipeg, there was a proposed positive list that was being floated around, and it looked like they were going to try to have it passed. And it was one of the most bizarre lists of reptile species I've ever seen. A lot of them are animals that I was not even familiar with. A lot of them were Australian animals that are not even in the hobby. So it was as if the person who made the list knew nothing about reptiles, or they knew enough about reptiles to choose animals that they know no one could ever get their hands on, and that essentially you could keep a corn snake and that was it. So when you say that these positive lists are becoming more and more restrictive, I'm talking like 12 species, 8 of them you've never seen before on the list. Like that's the sort of stuff that's being floated around.
I think I remember that list, and I remember looking at it. And at the time, I think there was like one collared lizard breeder in Canada who wasn't even really public about the fact they were doing it, and collared lizards were on the list. And I'm like, people aren't even like this isn't even a regular lizard running around Canada that
Yeah.
we all have right now. Like
Yeah, it's
it
so
was
weird.
weird to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we do need to do everything we can. And I don't necessarily like being the guy that goes, oh, we got to call it the big guys who are doing it wrong. Because I kind of get the way that looks too. It's like, oh, if you're not actually doing it, then, you don't really have as much, your words have less weight because you're not actually, having to deal with 1,000 animals and whatnot. But at the same time, those types of breeders do get, they get put on a pedestal in our hobby, and we do look at them as it's amazing how clean and great their environment looks, and the floors are clean and the tubs are clean, but it's really not the best look. And at the same, leading back to the middle of our conversation here is, how do you separate that from a mill? I'm not sure you can.
Yeah, I want to be like, oh, this way, because the word is just so, it cuts deep, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
when you care about animals and you hear that word, it just it hurts, right? I think when it, like puppy mills is literally probably one of the most depressing string of words ever.
Yeah,
Like,
it really is. Yeah, and
so it's just you're right. You're probably right. There's probably no other way to say it like that. But I also don't think we need to, chase them out of town with torches. It was kind of like what I said about the hides earlier. I understand you've got a lot of animals, so let's at least start like making improvements.
Mhm.
Maybe those adult racks you're using now turn into juvie racks, and you get some new adult rack. It's just, we all, and even myself, I constantly feel like I need to do better. In that other episode, you said, I don't think most people in the reptile, like 5% of people in the reptile hobby think about like the moral or ethics of what we do.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it with my wife, and she's like, that's all you do. That's literally all you do.
Yeah.
And it's so true, where I don't think people think about that part of it enough. And I don't know where the disconnect is. I don't know if they think they're not intelligent or they don't deserve that respect. But just from keeping as many species as I have, and specifically like certain ones like the collared lizards or the monkey tails, they're such intelligent animals. And to just write them off as reptiles and be able to treat them any differently than I would treat another animal, it doesn't make sense to me. So it probably is the correct term, but we shouldn't we shouldn't be torch chasing anyone.
Yeah, it's got to be a smoother process and more of like a lead by example type situation. And the one person on the podcast that's used the term puppy mill before was Tom Crutchfield, actually, which maybe is ironic for some people, because I think he even has, so he has a history of maybe things that are less ethical in our hobby.
Less savory.
Yeah, exactly. But he was somebody that just straight up called it out as what it is. So I do think it does need to be eased into it, and I think there is that disconnect between people not thinking about it in terms of ethics, is because they do get treated like a commodity. And that, again, that links to this conversation, is that if you're not thinking about it as an animal first and a being first, and you're treating it as a commercial commodity that can be sold, then it's pretty easy to just kind of jump over any ethics, because it's just a dollar sign, and you're trying to move. It's just like you're selling shoes or something.
Yeah. It's hard to say anything more to that, because it is very much, it's not, I also don't think it's like healthy at this point for the hobby.
Yes.
A lot of it was about growing that's kind of what that initial, why we thought these breeders were good, is like, oh, they're growing the hobby. Okay, but like, how many small ball python breeders are there now from those big breeders? So it's kind of, I don't know. I think it's too many people want to get rich off them, I guess, is what I'm going for there. Where I very much accepted that I make probably below minimum wage, and just, I love what I do. I love it. So
you don't want to do the hourly calculation.
Never. I don't ever want to have any part of that.
But it is great to see, somebody that's taking charge with, breeding as ethically as possible, and having success doing it, and essentially, giving yourself what's nearly a full-time income, like you said, you get to wake up and do what you love to do, and going out into the woods and finding sticks is not. It's not like, oh, this is a waste of my time. It's just part of the enjoyment of keeping and breeding. And that's why I like promoting breeders like yourself, because the more people that listen to this podcast and go, that's really what I want to do, whether it's trying to strive for a full-time gig or even just a small supplemental income, there is so much space for that in our hobby to have more of these micro, small batch breeders to come in and start even out competing the bigger guys. Like you had used that example of the expo, somebody having, $50 less for adult collared lizards, and you were still able to sell out, and we want to be able to compete in that area. So hopefully this kind of promotes and gets people excited about that concept. Can you talk a little bit about, you've mentioned a few of the projects you're working on, collared lizards and monkey tail skinks and whatnot. Are there do you have a favorite project you're working on, or are they all, is that not fair to ask?
I to be honest, it's probably those two that you named. One of them is just a passion project. The monkey tails, that's my dream species. And I kind of just like, I used to keep them for a friend, and then eventually they took them back when they were ready to take them back. And so I eventually was just like, I got to get my own. Like, I loved keeping those animals. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up getting a trio, and then I ended up getting more. And now I'm kind of at the point where they're definitely a passion project, because again, like your podcast has done a lot for opening my eyes to just different, I think it's really important to not be in like echo chambers. And I feel like you're kind of the other side, right? You're really talking about the ethics of keeping them and breeding them and things like that. And I think more breeders need to be involved in that conversation, or at least hear other people's opinions about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but the monkey tails, they were just like they're a passion thing. And I don't plan on ever selling any. My plan with them is to build up some sort of captive preservation thing. Mm-hmm. The Solomon Islands are like a really depressing state in terms of logging and rising sea levels. So like even in my lifetime, a large portion of their environment could just be gone. So I just want to not conserve, but preserve.
Yes. Yeah. Were the ones, the original trio or any of the other ones that you picked up, were they wild caught, or were they captive bred as well, or a mix of both?
No. So all of the ones that I've got are wild caught ones right now. It's really hard to find.
Yeah, especially in Canada. I haven't seen any, I don't think.
I got offered a trio about a week ago that was captive bred, but it's Christmas time. So being a small business, I can't just grab things. Yeah, it's an expensive drop. So
can you say how much roughly? I'm sure it's quite a lot.
Yeah, it was about 6,000.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
So I bought a car last week for that much.
Yeah, they're again, they're a passion project, so they're more there when there's extra money, and Christmas time is not that time, and for two people who run their own businesses.
Yeah. So let's say you do build up a colony, eventually that could be a lot of space requirement, and would you ever consider moving them to somebody that you trust and somebody that would want to work with that species as well? Or do you think that you're just going to have a colony of them and being able to manage that? I guess, like you said, you have land, you could probably eventually build outbuildings and whatnot.
I do. Yeah. So that is our eventual goal here of getting the land is we want to eventually make an outbuilding that will be 75% indoors and then 25% like a greenhouse.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So that's end game goal kind of thing. And then I think I would always keep some of them in the house. Like, this is all out of my basement. We have two separate rooms in the basement. One of them's the arid room and one's the tropical room. But I think I'd always want them on my property. The idea of them not being here would be...
Yeah. You want to be able to care for them.
Oh, my wife will be looking for me, and she just comes in and I'm just sitting in one of the rooms staring at someone. So yeah, that would be like my end game goal, to just have everything here. But I don't think I would want anyone else to care for them. But I definitely want to reach out to other monkey tail people who are working with larger groups in Canada, and eventually be able to swap babies so that we can keep that kind of going.
Were they hard to acclimatize, the wild caughts, or were they long-term captive? Or
So I have an adult pair where our female is currently hopefully going to have a baby in the next 2 months. They're demons. They're not nice animals, but they're beautiful.
And they have quite a bite, right?
Yeah. I have my banana with skin on just right through it. So, I mean, I assume my finger would probably get crushed a little bit.
Yeah.
The little ones, super easy. I got them when they were very young. And yeah, they all now, when I come in the room, they know who I am and they know what I bring.
Yeah. You're the food bringer.
Yeah. So those, the younger, it was easier, but they're one of those things where like I tell people they shouldn't be like a pet, probably. I want them so that I can produce off of them. I don't think anyone should be buying wild caught animals unless they want to be doing that. And then with monkey tails, you don't really get the luxury of mass producing. So that's why I plan to just keep most of them, because it's such a small amount.
Process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And are there any species that you're not working with that are kind of on your list of something that you might want to eventually add?
The other subspecies of monkey tail.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's two subspecies, and I would like the Alfred Schmidti. That would be
visually. Is there much of a difference between the two?
Size difference.
Oh, it's size. Okay.
A little bit of color too. I think the Schmidti are a little darker green with some lighter white kind of coloring, opposed to like the yellow. But mainly it's size.
And then as far as your business goes right now, I mean, I'm sure every year it's going to be a little bit different, but for right now, is it the collared lizards that's providing you the most revenue, or is it just a mix of everything?
This year was probably a mix of the collards. We had a really successful year with the collards, and the fat tails always.
Yeah.
Which was actually nice to see, just because I didn't go out of my way to do it, but I made a lot of normals and then whiteouts, which is just like a single gene that looks really pretty. And I've never seen any issues with them. So it's just it's a nice looking animal. Those actually sold really well, which is, to me, usually people want those as like a pet fat tail, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. That's kind of what you want. You don't necessarily want to be selling them into a place where someone's just going to treat them like a commodity, kind of going back to the heart of the conversation. So yeah, that's cool to see.
I think that's why I like the collards too, as well. And also I think just things that are a little more interactive than the morph stuff, because a lot of the time the morph stuff gets kind of clumped into that. You just keep it very sterile. Yes. Whereas if someone buys a collared lizard baby, I know they're probably going to do a nice setup, because they're entertaining lizards to just watch. So
yeah,
there's a better chance of it just getting that. And so I think my collection's kind of steered towards stuff like that. Like I just got into pink tongue skinks. I think they're a really good skink just due to the size. They're not very timid. They're things like that. That's kind of what I want to be pushing, is good reptile pets.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, and you can save the other stuff for passion projects, like you said, but to add animals to the market that are not good pets, it's probably another layer of that ethical side that, I mean, we talk about that too all the time, is breeding animals that are too big and whatnot. But a lot of time, even behavior is something that I don't really think about that much. But that's a really key point to whether or not an animal is going to be a good pet or not, is how skittish it is, how aggressive they can be. Are they active during the day, or are they active at all? If they aren't any of those things, then people are going to buy them and they're going to end up on Kijiji or Craigslist because I'm bored of this animal.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what makes them the morphs more of a commodity, right? Because they're not worrying about what is it going to do, it's just, it sits there, and then eventually they go, okay, well, you're just sitting there and I'm not doing anything with this project, so on to the next home, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
You get that. Yeah, you get, like I said, good pet reptiles are important. There's obviously dart frogs are still a good pet reptile, either amphibian, but they're still a good pet. Like they're entertaining to watch. They're beautiful. They're very easy to keep. Like you can be a good pet reptile without needing to be handled or whatever. But when there's when there's people trying to like work with things that are constantly just proving to be inadequate pets, like I love them, they're beautiful, but reticulated pythons, how many people can really house a reticulated python correctly?
Exactly.
So it's just you could, yeah. So things that are good pets are going to be medium sized to smaller reptiles. There's people who can house a reticulated python, but they also have too many eggs that you probably can't find that many people to house it, right? It's
Yes.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, we're in this weird spot where we need to maybe slow down a bit, and maybe that's why small batch breeding is what we all need to lean into a bit more. I've realized people can be like, oh, he's small batch, so that's why he wants people to do that. But I don't really have greed when it comes to this industry. If I can be with these animals and make a living, it doesn't need to be a good living. I just want to be able to be with these animals.
Yeah. And I think when you look at it from an ethical point of view, it's not hard to promote small batch, micro batch breeding. I mean, it's the same, like, to bring it back to that factory farming example, nobody's stoked about factory farming. It's not like, hey, we really want to promote these guys. Like, this is great. Now, I recognize that, that maybe is a way to get people to be fed and make sure there's enough food for the amount of people that we have. So there's ethical questions there, but it's not like it's not like people are cheering that on and saying this is fantastic. We would love to have more ranch style, pasture raised animals and free range animals. And it's the same as reptile breeding. The more of that, the better.
Yeah, well, even that example of the factory farms, like my wife wants chickens because I eat eggs, and she wants things to eat the ticks and pests out of her garden. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to go and be like, hey, KFC, I'd like to buy one of your chickens as my pet chickens. I'm going to go to a small farm, and I'm going to be like, hey, can you tell me about your chickens that you've hatched out? Like,
exactly.
It's this weird disconnect of people. Big in the reptile industry isn't looked at as like any cautious thing. It's just sort of like, oh, they're big, they're doing it good. And that's not always the case, because like Jeff Bezos is screwing a lot of people over, but doesn't like it's sort of like this. Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, he got really rich during the pandemic when everybody went out of business.
Right? Yeah. So it's like people need to just basically, I understand it makes reptiles a little less affordable because I need to charge more. I do. But it goes back to that. Do you want to support Amazon or Walmart, or do you want to support small business? And I think genuinely we all want to probably support small business. And when you were saying with the farms, we all should be technically going to a small farm, or at least knowing the butcher knows where he got it, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If people are eating animals and doing that, and we're not doing it here, it's just weird, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If they're doing that with the food supply and we can't do it with our pets, then that's a bit of a disconnect.
Yeah. Even our pets' food, not mine, but snake food, like rats. Rats are smart animals, very smart animals, and I don't like the way that rats are kept in feeder conditions, whatever you want to call them. That again goes to being a mill again, like even labs.
Yeah, that's a mill. How is that not a mill? I mean, it's funny because it's the same as it's the same setup as a ball python.
Yeah, and it's just it goes back to that thing I said earlier, where you can't just be like, they're not part of us, but it feels like that, because I feel like everyone is striving for more right now.
Yeah,
and then that's sort of still back in like the 80s. Whoever invented the first rack just did so much damage.
Yeah, well, that's what it was, right? It was a rodent rack. That's what they were designed for.
I've never looked. Is that how it started? Was like someone took a rodent rack and was like, this can work for my snakes.
Yeah, that is actually how. And so I don't know the full story there. Somebody listening will know the whole thing. But you're right. Even the ethics of keeping rats in those rack systems, and I mean, because you go, oh, they're just going to be killed anyway. But yeah, it is. They are super intelligent. And I've been to some places to pick up feeders where I'm just like, this is terrible, like the smell is terrible, the condition of these animals is brutal. I know that we're just going to euthanize them, I'm going to feed them off to my animals, but that is another, it's tough, because that's another expense and another area of the hobby where we don't necessarily like to lift up the rug, but it is definitely a part of our hobby, and it's something to consider.
Yeah, like I don't mean it in like a gatekeepy way, but maybe this hobby should be a little more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to have less expendable animals if the animals are more expensive. Everything is just going to get treated much better, right? I don't want people to not be able to afford reptiles, but we're putting prices on living things, so that needs to be an appropriate price to provide for that living thing, right?
Yeah.
A purebred dog will cost you thousands of dollars because of all the work that goes into it. So yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. Well, and there's probably a price point that some economist knows that you can walk the line between impulse purchase and like, conscientious purchase. And I don't know, it's probably like, I don't know what it would be. Maybe it's like $20 or something. Who knows? I'm not saying we should only charge $20, but there is a price point with reptiles that it is absolutely impulse. And you see that at the big chain pet stores, and even some of, breeders who are working with huge quantity of animals they can sell for such a small price point that there's actually no thought process that needs to go in on the consumer side, because it's just whatever. Even if this animal dies, I only spent $20 on it, which is, yeah. So I do agree that animals could be more expensive and it wouldn't impact the hobby at all.
No, because I mean, then if people are paying more, they're going to want to go somewhere that they're going to get more from, which is going to be the small batch guys that are taking the time to know that animal and its care. They're just, yeah. But when I see like even Frank Payne, like when he does the podcast with you guys and you see what's behind him, I see the enclosures and I can see the geckos in them. That's an appropriate sized enclosure for those geckos.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's got plants in there. And again, he's a teacher on top of doing that, but says he's running a profitable business. And it's like that you can do it and treat the animals correctly, because a lot of it isn't just, you can't go out and be like, I'm starting a reptile business and then go get everything you need, because then you're just broke immediately.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you're doing this for a long time, more people could definitely successfully do it if there was less of the farming or mill of animals.
Well, and another thing that kind of leads us into that maybe we'll kind of wrap up on is just remembering when we were talking before we hit record, you were talking about just the general openness of being a breeder. So maybe you wanted to touch on that. I wasn't sure if that was just openness, if people have questions or people want to get into breeding themselves, like just not being a closed book when it comes to information that you've gathered being in the hobby.
I will always talk to anyone in the hobby. It doesn't matter what it's about. If you're having a mental problem, feel free to reach out. I'll talk to you. Mm-hmm. But like I will talk about anything. I don't think hiding things is good. I think we all need to be open, honest. I think some of the questions that we should probably start asking as purchasers of animals, instead of what's this animal's lineage or something like that, is can you show me what the parents are being kept in?
Yeah.
Like that's
simple. Yeah,
it's so simple. It shows you so much. If if some people won't be willing to do that, and that's fine, right? They'll still have business, but like I think it's important for me to be able to like, look, this is how I keep my adults. This is how I'm keeping the babies. I don't do anything in a way that makes me uncomfortable. So that's kind of my barometer of it. If I'm feeling comfortable with it, I should be comfortable showing it.
Yeah. That's very well said. And I completely agree. I think the more openness, the better. And that forces everybody to have a higher standard as well. Like you said, you're not hiding anything. Well, James, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed this. Is there anything that you wanted to wrap up with? Any last words? I think we did cover almost everything. And if you don't have any last words, that's no problem. I won't put you on the spot. But if you do have anything or any advice for people who are trying to get into small batch breeding, do you have anything there?
Yeah, I have something for that, and then I have something I want to mildly plug.
Sure.
Just go slow. It's not a race. And I see a lot of the people who are really young wanting to get into this. And again, for the listeners not on YouTube, I have a lot of gray in my hair. I'm not super young. I'm not one of the old guys, but I'm not super young. I've been doing this for a good bit. So just go slow. And if you're really passionate about the animals, people can make it work. They just need to understand that your life don't expect to get rich off doing it right. Ever. I don't like to think about it, because I like I said to you when we were starting this up, if I do this here for 2 hours or whatever, it's just 2 hours that I'm doing later, right? It's a lot of work, and you really just need to go slow and be passionate about it.
Yeah.
And be open. I guess it's two things. Be open with other breeders. There's a lot of breeders who don't want to share things or do any of that. There's a new fat tail breeder who just like is kind of starting out, and I will help them as much as I can, because if more people are working with the species you're working with, it means that species can be more popular, which is not a bad thing, right? If it's a good species to keep, it's not bad for it to be more popular. Well, let's take some of the burden off cresties and ball pythons of needing to be the only things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then as far as a plug, I don't really have a plug for myself. People can go to topshelfgeckos.ca. I only have a couple geckos left for sale this year. And then Top Shelf Geckos on Instagram and Facebook. But my plug is more just for my passion project. I don't have a specific charity for Solomon Islands or anything, but if people could just go read about it, that would be huge. There is a lot of illegal logging and legal logging. There's less than 1% of the island is actually protected, and they're losing land constantly to rising sea levels. So a lot of the animals there are animals that are commonly imported in the pet trade. So people establishing those animals like monkey tails, spinosus monitors, things like that, that's probably really important, because I don't think that will be a very ecologically friendly place in my lifetime.
Yeah, that is a great call to action. Very simple. Go educate yourselves on what's happening there, and if there's some way that either you can, help conservation, or if you're somebody that's in the position where you can actually start a passion project with the species from there, that would be a huge green check mark for herpetoculture in general. So I think that's fantastic. Yeah,
I don't want to be greedy and plug me. I just want to plug what keeps me going, and that's those monkey tails.
Awesome. Well, James, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us today. I know this will be a very popular episode for listeners, especially for those who are interested in getting into breeding and working with animals this way. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. It was awesome talking with you.
All right, that brings us to the end of the episode. James, thank you so much for jumping on an episode. I know I kind of sprung it on you. We're going back and forth in the DMs, and I just said, hey, why don't we bring you on the podcast so we can have this discussion publicly, and we can kind of hash it out a little bit so the listeners can hear that as well. And I was super gracious that you were willing to accept the invite, so I'm glad that we were able to do that. Listener, what do you think? Where do you sit on this term? Do you think, because I know a lot of comments, I quite often see people using the term mill, and they say we should call it like it is. Do you think even the super clean facilities that don't have any enrichment but are clean and the animals are seemingly healthy, is that a mill, or is there some area in between? Or do you think just because of the fact that it's actually not living a very fulfilling life, they're not treating those animals like pets, and it's actually kind of a sad existence, should we just throw that into the mill bin? I don't know. I'm kind of sitting right in between both worlds. I'm starting to think that maybe those are mills, and the cleanliness is only one factor. The classic puppy mill image I have in my head is horrendous, and that necessarily is not the only thing that makes up a mill. I think what James said, treating the breeders like pets, is a serious distinguishing factor to move yourself away from that definition of being a mill. So anyway, I'd love to know what your guys' thoughts are. If you're listening to this on audio, maybe you could pop over to the YouTube version so you can get into the conversation in the comment section. If you are looking for more information on this episode, make sure you head to animalsathomenetwork.com. If you would like to support the show on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome, or head to our show's sponsor, customreptilehabitats.com. You can head to the affiliate link in both the YouTube description or the show notes. Again, that is an affiliate link, so if you make a purchase, a commission comes back to me at no extra cost to you. And I think we'll leave it there. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can give us a rating on the Spotify or Apple. That really does help a lot. Or just share it on Instagram and Facebook. And I will catch you in the next episode.